Wellbeing Portal podcast. Today, we have an amazing guest, Rachel Gilfrin. She is a coach who really specializes in empowering women. Her passion is in communication, career progression, and really enabling confidence to be born into each and every single woman and people in their professional careers. She stepped out herself of being in IT after she had her own personal experiences, to which I'm sure she'll explain. But now she's really there, passionate and with a mission to enable every single female to become the best versions of themselves. And so I really wanted to bring her on today because I'm sure that she will be able to impart some really amazing insights and value to not only women, actually, but as we are the Wellbeing Portal, it's also in leadership. So I take today's podcast as an amazing insight tool to empower women, but also to enable it to gain perspective and to be able to gain understanding for any of the men in the audience here, especially who are in leadership, who want to learn how to connect in a more powerful way to the people within their team that are female. So welcome, Rachel, and it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you so much and good morning. That was a lovely introduction and definitely covered a lot of what I do. So thank you. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Now, I wanted to dive straight in today to a topic that I know you're very passionate about and something that you say you lead with that I really want to discover more about, which is really framing what you do under the ability to understand communication and what that actually does to enable us to become our best selves. So should we start maybe just with the word communication? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, sure. Well, I always love to start with a definition of something, even in a lot of my corporate programs, because I think that we all have our own interpretations of things. And then so when we're kind of looking into maybe improving or becoming more proficient in a skill, understanding what that is obviously is so key. So communication plays such a huge part in career progression as a whole, because put simply, a lot of the time we don't reflect upon which areas of communication we're good at, and we make assumptions about how we come across with people. Now, one of the things that I always like to start off with when I'm explaining to people about the impact that communication skills have is by looking at things like statistics surrounding first impressions. So one of the things that I include in my course is that, the Harvard study of communication statistics, which I find incredibly interesting, which is when you're looking at a first impression as a whole, 55% of that first impression is made up of the visual element. And so what we think is the most important thing is going to be about the words that we speak and, the impression that we try and make with our knowledge. Actually, it becomes less and less important, and it actually only makes up 7% of that overall first impression. And so when we start to think about the way in which we come across, communication skills really do need honing and really toning down and making into our own, so that we can become more proficient in the way that's appropriate for that situation, if that makes sense.
I love how you actually just what you finished up on there, which is appropriate. I just think that is a key word, and I don't hear it very often, actually. So it's just sparked something in me, because I do notice that a lot of communication isn't appropriate to the given person, so that nearly like that adjustability or flexibility in the manner that you are able to communicate in a different way to resonate with a different person or a different employee and a different team member, whoever that may be, needs adjusting. Do you find that in terms of communication impacts somebody's ability when they're in a work setting?
Oh, definitely. I
Mm,
totally agree with you. I think that as a leader and as somebody who's maybe aspiring to be a leader in the future, you need to be able to adjust the way in which that you interact with people, not only to sort of have the emotional intelligence to understand them as a person, see what they need, but
mm,
also to be able to get the most from the conversation. And everybody's different and everybody reacts differently to different things. So having a kind of one size fits all
mm,
doesn't always work. And in some instances as well, different types of communication, whether they're kind of formalized or informal, will be applicable to various situations. So yeah, I definitely think that plays a huge part in it. And I think that, casting my mind back to my corporate career, so I
mm,
spent quite a bit of time in IT sales, and one of the main elements of my role was going out on the road to meet with customers face to face and really get an understanding for what their needs were as a customer of ours. And I think that one of the things that I learned through doing that was that you can sort of go in with a professional outlook and wanting to come across, very corporate, very professional, and very prepared. But sometimes I would walk into a meeting and there would be, directors there that were just really informal. They didn't want to sit
mm.
and talk to somebody that sounded as though it was, all very rehearsed and that sort of thing. So that adaptability element became more and more important as I cultivated relationships throughout that career.
And did you find that led to more ease of success, if you will?
Definitely, but it did take some time. I
Mm,
think communication and learning how to flex that is quite difficult, and I think that it takes quite a lot of practice to try and read situations,
mm,
but also to adjust them in a way in which is gradual to ensure that there's not a complete, alteration in the way in which you're coming across. So, for example, if somebody is wanting to be sort of less formal, not kind of going from being in work mode to almost as though you're speaking with your friends, which sounds obvious, but it isn't always the case.
absolutely. What I would love to do now is merge this, communication that you clearly know a lot about, bounce back to that later on. But I would like to also merge that with another area that you're very passionate about, especially with enabling women in the workplace, which is the word confidence. So,
Hmm.
how do you see nearly that synergy or that relationship between communication and confidence, then those two integrating to help a person in their career?
Well, it's hugely important, and I'm so glad that you've brought them up both together in the same guise. Really, the way in which that I started my business last year was all based around the fact that when I reflected on the areas where I'd made progress and the areas where I maybe had been a little bit frustrated with my lack of progress, nearly everything came back to three key pillars. And these pillars were mindset, confidence, and communication.
Mm,
And the pillars are in that order exactly because the mindset piece always has to come first. Now, this word gets thrown around quite a lot, so I'll
mm,
kind of give you my take on what mindset means to
please.
us in this way. So, effectively, our mindsets today are made up of various different situations and experiences that we've had throughout life, and they shape the beliefs that we have about what is possible for us. Um, Especially going into a career, what you believe is possible for you to achieve is hugely important because we don't often go for opportunities unless we already believe that there's a possibility that we'll be successful because we fear rejection and we want to move away from that rejection. And so mindsets are so important in really looking at the way in which you approach situations.
Mm,
But then, in order for us to be successful or want to continue to make progress in something, that confidence needs to be built somewhere along the way as well.
mm,
And the way in which I view confidence is very much it's our beliefs in our abilities and our trust in ourselves. But I do confidence coaching one to one with a lot of women as well. And I
mm,
find that nearly always what comes up surrounding confidence is that a lot of people, both men and women, think that you're either confident or you're not.
Mm,
And what I love to teach is that confidence can be built, it can be learnt, and it takes consistency and some good tools and techniques that you can use to build that over time. But I think the main problem with confidence is that it requires you to get out of your comfort zone. And whenever we leave the comfort zone, it feels icky, it feels scary. And so we kind of try and jump back in because we think, no, I'm not going to make any progress here. It's not worked in the past, maybe. So there's a previous mindset that kind of holds us back, which is why it's so important to begin with mindset.
mm,
Um, and from there, once you've started to build your confidence, I believe in that way you can begin to communicate in a way that really speaks more about, who you are and really is underpinned by your beliefs rather than going into it from a perspective or a place of fear. So communication, as I'm sure you're aware, Sarah, it often comes across so much in the way you communicate,
mm.
how much conviction or belief in yourself that you have when you do speak, or when you do have your body language in something like a presentation. So it's something that I've kind of always gone straight back to mindset of whenever I'm looking at leaving my comfort zone again. I go all the way back to the beginning and go back through the three processes.
Yeah, no, I think that that is such a valuable thing. Even just that awareness is the trigger, isn't it? So that, like what you're saying is when you see yourself in a situation, you pull yourself back and say, hang on, where are my three pillars?
Yeah.
And so, like mindset, and then confidence and communication. And I do think, like you did say that in that order, didn't you? Mindset,
Yeah.
confidence, communication, in that order. And I think that does make so much sense because often in a communication setting where we get into these automatic kind of react or response situations where sometimes we're triggered by something and we're not aware of that communication. So therefore, correct me if I'm wrong, but the framework that you advocate and you coach in really means that you're not just saying this is what you have to say, you're saying feel it first.
Yeah.
And then when you feel it first, your subconscious mind is feeling it because it's believing it, which then enables your communication not to be something that's staged or framed or rehearsed, but something that you're saying is nearly like an automatic response to what has been taken place because of the mindset shift, the confidence that has formed out of that mindset shift, which then leads to a more empowered or a more effective way of communication. Is that
Yeah,
what you're saying?
definitely. It's really about ensuring that you're choosing the intention from which you're communicating, rather than reacting emotionally to something, or perhaps not realizing that you're coming
Mm,
across in a certain way. It's picking that kind of grounding yourself again and picking that intention that you're communicating from. And you know, it it does take practice. It's not something that you can just do one day, but by revisiting all of the pillars and making sure that you're continually aiming to go through that process, communication skills then become more refined. But one thing that we sort of touched on was about making sure that you have an understanding and this sort of personal reflection of where you are proficient in communication skills
mm,
is really important as well. And one of the things that I teach in my group coaching program, which, as you can imagine, they love me for, I always ask them to try and record a meeting. So it could be something, it's a lot easier to do now because of
mm,
Zoom and that sort of thing.
mm,
But I'll always encourage them, obviously with the permission of the other person that they're speaking with,
mm,
to just record a meeting and then watch it back and just score yourself on all the different areas. Things like pace of speech, the volume, the pitch of your voice, and how much participation you have within the conversation versus the other person, and really get a foundational base layer of understanding about what kind of communication skills that you might need to refine and where you're strong in those communication skills as well. And it's something that I think a lot of people find terrifying because they think, oh gosh, I don't want to listen to myself, or I don't want to look at myself. But really, by getting the facts, it enables you to be able to move forward and refine everything and get to the best sort of communicator that you can be.
Absolutely. I think that actually having the intention, or having the courage to be confronting to your own self, is something that so many people aren't willing to do, which is
Yeah.
why, like Bob Proctor, who's been my mentor for years, calls this the terror barrier. So when you face that terror barrier, as in looking yourself straight in the eye for what it is what you're saying in these to do when you're recording a meeting, which is it feels uncomfortable, and that's what propels you forward. What I would love to, if this is okay for you, to get from you within these core passions that like you know so much about, is actually two different perspectives. If you were going to give three top tips to leadership, or to females professionally with regards to communication, what would they be? And then after that, what I would love, because I know that your coaching is specifically for women to empower them, but I think that it's really important to enable the knowledge that here in the portal, there's men interacting with the portal. And so I would really love to get your insights. If you were talking to men, in especially in leadership, to say these are the three top tips that actually will enable the women to feel better, to feel more empowered, which will in turn enable you to get more from these women. So then we're helping the women, and we're also helping the men help the women.
Yeah, it's so important. I know you always lead from the front as well in what you do in terms of, getting the leadership team to understand your aim. So that's really important. I guess if I was to say top 3 tips for maintaining the best sort of communication, the first one would always be get that foundational base layer and really understand where you are proficient and where, you might need a little bit more help, and just really understanding yourself and without judgment as well, because it's going to be so important to make sure that you're respectful of, your own needs and your own development. There's different sorts of communication.
Mm,
So there's obviously verbal, non-verbal, written communication, and listening also is a type of communication. But I think for my second tip, one of the things that I would say is, in as far as written communication in the workplace, is really important to kind of be self-aware about how you may be coming across, or how there could be an emotional investment within an email response. Because I think that we've all been in situations before where we might have had an email and thought, hmm, they sound a bit off, or and then when we respond, our backs are up a little bit. And it's so often that we're totally wrong. We've interpreted it in a completely different way.
mm,
So one of the things that I always say is, when you are looking at making sure you're communicating via email, to say that all the emotion is removed from that, because you're literally stating the facts and you're being very, very clear about what the desired return output is from the other person that you're speaking
mm,
to, just to make sure that the clarity is there. I would always advocate picking up the phone, but I know that, in this day and age, it's not something that everybody goes to first for their kind of primary form of communication. But that's something to be sort of mindful of as
mm,
well. Um, and I suppose for my third tip surrounding communication, um, ask for feedback. There's a lot of people around you, in both a professional capacity and also a personal capacity, that will be able to kind of give you some hints and tips about where you're a great communicator, and sometimes how you may come across in a situation without realizing it. Now, I think that being able to have an open line of communication with your manager is really important to be able to understand this. But by getting that foundation right, by getting the feedback, I think it's really helpful to be able to put the best the best impression across to people like customers and clients. Or, if you have a role where you're speaking a lot internally, making sure that you come across as somebody who's open to collaboration, wants to work with other teams, and really is somebody who is keen to go over and above, because you're constantly checking back in with yourself and reviewing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And so do you think that the information about that communication foundation is important for both sides, so for male and female within that?
Yeah,
So
100%. I think that everything that we've discussed is applicable to both male and female. I predominantly work with women, and the reason that I do, Sarah, is because I was in so many situations throughout the progression of my career whereby I felt as though I wasn't taken seriously enough. I felt as though a lot of the time in a face-to-face meeting capacity, there was a lot of behaviors that happened that, really knocked my confidence. And the sort of things that I'm talking about are forms of microaggression. So things that might happen within a meeting setting would be, somebody speaking over me and just completely dismissing what I was going to say, ignoring something that I've said. So you just sort of sit there waiting to be rejoined into the conversation, which makes me think, oh, I don't want to speak.
Makes you feel about that small.
Yeah. And then also, some of the cheekiest things that happened, which I again talk about in my program, is idea pinching. Somebody passing off your idea as their own, and unfortunately, these behaviors do still happen. And so, one of the things that I always wanted to do is to help women to prepare responses for these situations, but also have the confidence before this even happens to know that their contribution is 100% valid, is 100% needed, and they'd be doing themselves a disservice by attending a meeting and not putting forward their unique perspective, because that's what they're there for. If you're in a meeting, it's because somebody wants you to have an input, right? But we don't always see it like that. We see it as though it's a platform for somebody to make us feel inferior sometimes. And so, to your earlier question, in order to kind of help men understand why it is particularly difficult for women in these scenarios and to look out for opportunities for them to help them, I would suggest that they would be vigilant and start to notice these 3 types of behavior. So, pinching ideas, calling someone, speaking over somebody, and ignoring somebody are the 3 main things that do happen. So I would encourage them to kind of say, sorry, I don't actually think that Olivia was finished speaking. Do you want to finish off, Olivia? And doing things like that, where they're calling out behaviour that they see in both other men and both other women, and just maybe providing that kind of support for people where that behaviour does occur. But outside of the meeting environment, I think it's really important to ensure that there aren't any particular barriers within the organisation for women versus men. I was asked quite recently, towards the end of my career, if I felt as though I couldn't go for something because I was a woman. And I just thought that was a ridiculous question, because that shouldn't even be there. That observation shouldn't even be there, because I know that everything that I do is based on my abilities. So really just making it apparent from day one what a clear career path looks like and what each person would need to do to get there, obviously regardless of gender.
Yeah. No, I think that what you're advocating and what you're doing is so fundamentally important. I mean, that they've been shown. I don't know if you look at Gallup research, but the recent Gallup research, and they've got a book out, Wellbeing at Work, and they really talk about the foundation of well-being of employees and of leadership starts actually with a base of communication, and that communication is actually the biggest deficit. So it's the biggest step either up or down to an employee's sense of well-being and a sense of being valued in this.
Yes.
And another thing that is being shown is the consistency within communication frameworks. So I think that, like what you're doing sounds amazing, because for women, you're not only saying these are common hurdles and
Mm.
common things that can take place to knock you back, but you're giving the practicalities of, in these situations, how can you make them not barriers? Because coming then back to your 3 pillars, it actually starts with just the framing of your mindset on how you don't need to be reacting to that situation. Instead, you can be responding to it. Reacting
Yeah.
is out of control, responding is in control. And so I feel like what you're advocating and what you're passionate about frames not only your ability to have career progression, any person's career progression. It takes down barriers of entire relationships, which actually becomes organizational culture in general. All of well-being, nothing will work without a baseline of healthy communication. And then obviously your 2 pillars of mindset and confidence are all in the mix. So
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's really kind of you to say, and I think it's really important.
yeah.
Certainly important to me personally.
Mm,
But I think as well, when we talk about highlighting common hurdles or challenges that have happened, highlighting them to everybody in the business, even leaders as well, will help them to reflect back on. Do you know what? This hasn't happened in this organization, hopefully, but it may have happened in the past careers, and
mm,
it helps them to feel an understanding of why that was different versus what they want their new culture to be in this organization. And by understanding things that have happened that can knock confidence, it really helps them to be able to lean towards what actually does help to build confidence rather than kind of looking backwards. So yeah, I think it's so important just having the awareness of what happened
absolutely.
and not shutting our eyes to it anymore.
Absolutely. The awareness and then the intention,
Mm.
that goes with that awareness, I think. And the other thing is with leadership is, I think that that's something that many people don't think about as well, is that there's these layers of leadership. So a leader will often have a leader, will often have a leader. It goes up the ladder. So they may be in leadership, but then they're also affected by leadership that goes, into the layers of management.
Mm.
So they need to understand how they feel when their boss, their manager, their leader speaks to them in a wrong way, and understand how that communication framework filters down too. So,
Yeah.
Rachel, please, can you explain? You have an amazing podcast. Remind the audience of the name of the podcast and where they can find you. And do you want to, because you'll do it much more justification, summarize in your words, the framework of what you do within your podcast?
Yeah, thank you. So, my podcast is called Achieve With Me, and it's really targeted towards ambitious women who are keen to obviously move forward in their career. They want to improve their confidence and communication skills. And what it really does is addresses various different workplace challenges that we have on a daily basis, but also gives practical tools and tips for handling those. So it's a bit of positivity. I used to always love listening to podcasts on a Monday morning before my week. So I kind of wanted to give back and provide that for somebody as well. So it's available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all the usual platforms, really. Um, and I offer 2 different areas of my coaching. So
Mhm.
one-to-one coaching, which really helps to kind of hone in on confidence within women, look at what areas in which that they need to improve, and maybe how they've got to that place where they need to improve as well.
Mm,
But then also I do the corporate coaching, which is in a group basis. So this is where a lot of the frameworks for that mindset, confidence and communication understanding comes in, because I'd take a group of around 10 women and take them through a 6-week program to really help them to personally reflect on both where they are today, getting that foundational understanding, but also looking at how they can begin to co-create their career path with their employer to make sure that they're building it from a place of strengths and values rather than looking at, what's the next linear progression that the business might have available for me. So yeah, please do. You can reach out. I'm on Instagram at Rachel Harriet Coaching, and do remember to tune in to Achieve with me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been insightful and valuable. And I'm sure that, it really just adds that layer of what we always say, awareness, to respect the power of communication. And I think that that's something that everyone needs to reach out, because, I don't know what you find, but there's constant progression that can take place. You don't have to have a critical problem to want to better yourself and better empower yourself to expand in broader ways. And that often starts with that framework of mindset, of confidence, that leads to different communication, which is also self-talk. We communicate to ourselves all the time in our thoughts. So I think, like what you're doing is amazing to enable transformation, for women, which then filters out to the men, because the response to how they communicate, whether that's good or bad, is better. So amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And
thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely wonderful. Really grateful.
Yeah, it's amazing. Oh, one last question I've got. Considering we're a global, the Wellbeing Portal is global, that we're a global platform. I know you're based in the UK. One key question I want to ask you for the audience for the future is, do you conduct everything virtually, or is everything you do personal in a face-to-face setting? How flexible are you? If there was, let's randomly say, a client who wanted to meet you that was in Europe or in Canada or in Australia, how able is that?
Yeah, so I do most of my coaching on Zoom, to be fair, which I think has been great, especially over the last 12 months with all the changes. I'm definitely flexible to time zones, just providing we can look at a consistent time slot to meet up and to make sure that that works with the time zones. But I'm committed to reaching people who align with my message. So regardless of their location, I would always try and make that work. And, for both my one-to-one clients and my corporate clients, I always offer a free consultation just so we can get to understand how we would work together anyway. So of course that would be done over Zoom. So definitely flexible to that. Thank you for asking.
Amazing. And last but not least, what is your website?
It's www.rachelharrietcoaching.co.uk.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rachel. And I hope that we will cross paths in the future, because we definitely align with our values. So it's been lovely talking to you, and thank you so much for your time.
Marvelous. Thank you.